Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexi the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. Today we've got a special guest, returning champion. I think you've been on more than anybody else. I have to go back and count. But it's my boss again, David Dayen of the American Prospect. Welcome, David. Thanks for coming.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're, one day at a time here up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. The cultural center of the universe. We wanted to have you on to talk about a number of things. I thought we could start out, you published a piece today about this Apple lawsuit decision, which I had not been paying attention to at all. But it's a pretty quintessential David Dayen piece, as Harold Meyerson was saying. But yeah, can you just explain to us what that's about and what effect it had?
Goes back several years. Epic Games, which is the makers of Fortnite and other major games, sued Apple because of its dominance on the App Store. We know there are pretty much only two phones, or at least two phone operating systems that are available in the U.S. and really worldwide. You either have an Android phone or you have an Apple iOS phone, which is typically the iPhone. And both of those phones have similar terms. They always talk about this in the name of security, but they are essentially toll booths. So app developers, if you want to get on the iPhone, you have to pay 30% for all in-app purchases. Fortnite sells these little trinkets as part of the game. And let's say they go for $1, 30 cents of that has to go to Apple. And, for maybe Fortnite can handle that, but a lot of other companies, for apps, that really cuts into their margins. So Fortnite, or at least Epic Games, said, well, why don't we just put a link in the app, and then people can go to the link and then they can buy the trinkets for Fortnite elsewhere. And Apple said, nope, can't do that. You're not allowed to communicate with on our phone. You're not allowed to communicate with your own customers. You can't put a link in. You're not allowed to do that. You have to just keep paying our 30% toll. So Epic Games took them to court, and in 2021 they got a favorable ruling. It wasn't totally favorable; it was a mixed ruling, but at least on this point that I just talked about, the district court judge said yes, Apple has to give the opportunity for outside app developers to communicate with their customers and give them and offer a link so they have an alternative way to pay for stuff associated with the app. So Apple appeals. They appeal and lose at the appeals court. They try the Supreme Court, and that also fails. The Supreme Court doesn't take it up. And so in early 2024, so they've delayed this now 2.5 years, where they're still collecting 30% toll. And in January 2024, they have to make a decision. And here's the decision they make. Okay, you can link out, but we'll charge you 27% on all off-app purchases. You have to give that to us to stay on the iPhone. And that continues even 7 days after the time that a consumer clicks on that link. So, consumer clicks on the link, and within any time within the next 7 days they buy something from that link, we get 27% as Apple. Also, they restricted the language on that link. They restricted the type of link so that it didn't carry through the user's account information to just make it harder. And they put up what is literally called a scare screen that says, so every time someone would click on the link to go off the app, a big screen would come up that would say, careful, you're going onto the web, and Apple can't guarantee that you're not going to be scammed on the web. So they did everything possible to frustrate and block the ability for these off-app purchases to happen. And even if they did happen, they charged 27%, which if you add a 3% processing fee that every credit card offers, puts together, that's now 30%. So it's essentially equivalent as far as the app developer is concerned. And Fortnite said, well, this violates completely the order that the court put in. And the court took a look at it. They did discovery hearings, and they found out that Apple had been planning this for years, that they came up with this solution to this loss of billions of dollars of passive profits. And they even brought Tim Cook, the CEO, in, who said, they gave him an option, like, here's something that's a little less lucrative, but probably complies with the court. And here's something more lucrative that maybe doesn't. And he's like, let's take that more lucrative one. And they even, during this discovery phase, they had individuals, executives from Apple testify, including the VP of finance. And he just flat out lied on the stand multiple times. And as I say in the piece, the ruling came down this week from the district court, and I think it's fair to say that the district court judge lost her shit. She completely went off on Apple, saying that, you lied to this court, you tried to cover it up, and so here's what's going to happen now. We are immediately going to force you to eliminate that 27% fee on off-app purchases, to allow the app developers to characterize that call to action in any way that they want, to get rid of the scare screen, and to basically liberate these companies from having to deal with Apple's developer tax. And what's really interesting about it is what happened after that. So after that goes into place, I think it was Tuesday night or maybe Wednesday morning or something like that. Within 24 hours, Epic Games puts out a new store that says, here's a new way to do off-app purchases, and all you developers, we're going to make it completely free for you to do that. Stripe came up with a new product that will help app developers process those payments. There's all this activity going on in this space now because the market got restructured, and it got restructured by a court order. So, we talk about regulation as if it's just coming from government, but this entirely was a case where the regulation was being done by Apple in their own interests. They were structuring this market, this app store market. And when government stepped in the form of the court and said, no, you're structuring this market in a blatantly anti-competitive way, we're going to change that, all of a sudden innovation explodes and this market changes in fundamental ways. And I think that's really interesting when we're, at this time when we're talking about the value of regulation and how to, create abundance in our markets. And here's an example where it was actually government having to step in and stop private regulation to get the market moving.
Kind of funny that, the Epic Games, which is not known as being world's greatest company for workers or for players, those little, they were big into the loot box thing, I think, for a while. And those little, microtransactions to buy the skins for your Fortnite character are they use some kind of scammy tactics to get like little kids to buy that stuff.
And the FTC even fined them. And late last year, all these gamers were getting like this money back from the FTC, and they were showing it on social media, like, look at all this money I'm getting back. So government had a role to play there. So, these are kind of two different things, right?
Yeah.
There's these scammy dark patterns that Epic Games was using. And, government stepped in and tried to protect consumers in that market. And then there's the larger, scammier thing, which may have facilitated or enabled or, forced Epic Games into thinking this is the way we have to treat our customers because we have this 30% tax that we're dealing with. So changing that market is going to lower prices for consumers as well. So, I think we can look at it on two tracks here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, that's what I was going to say, that like, regardless of how, great a company Epic Games is or not, that's just 30% is huge. That's such like, what company has a 30% profit margin such that they can just successfully, eat that cost and give it to Apple for doing nothing basically, except for, having to like just happen to run the biggest walled garden in the phone space.
I mean, the App Store is once you set it up, the marginal cost of bringing on a new app it trends to zero, right?
Yeah.
And yet you're getting 30% of their revenues from every sale.
This is why, for what it's worth, Yanis Varoufakis in Techno-Feudalism refers to this example, among others, like Amazon, popular ones, as to why, rents are being collected in this new way in cyberspace. And the way that capitalism is functioning now, it doesn't matter whether we call it capitalism or not, but the thing that's new is the power of companies like Apple and Google and Amazon to extort in this way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of the first real example of actual consequences being placed on a big tech firm. Apple said they're going to appeal, but the appeal isn't delaying anything. Like, this is in place now. And that's very different. And that market is changing right now as a result of these changes to the rules. And, we're in this moment where Google may be broken up after being found a monopolist 3 times. Facebook is in an active court case in the liability phase as to whether the WhatsApp and Instagram acquisitions were illegal. And we see these tactics over and over again, like what Apple took. They view these adverse rulings as obstacles that they just then have to engineer their way through, right? That they just have to figure out how to overcome them. And if it's deceptive in the way that they're doing that, so be it. And they're finally getting called out on that. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. It's just it's kind of incredible, that the biggest company in the world just like ate it, just bit it big time in court and was caught red-handed lying and cheating and paid a price. Incredible.
And we kind of think of Apple as the good actor in this. I mean, they have very good liberal branding. I don't think, was Tim Cook with the other oligarchs at the Trump inauguration? I know he gave money, but I'm not sure he was like actually there. And he had kind of a bit of a halo around him. Like he's not Zuckerberg, he's not Bezos, he's Tim Cook, right? But he was deeply involved in lying to the court. He was actively involved. And you start to think back, and I've had Apples since my Apple IIc in the 90s, right? Like I've been a longtime brand loyalist for 30 plus years. You start to wonder, like, what value is Tim Cook actually offering? What does he actually do? They haven't had a good product launch in probably the last decade. And, basically the product launches are new iterations of the old stuff that Steve Jobs came up with. Yeah. And their core competency seems to be monopolizing markets. And you wonder what value that has after they've been caught monopolizing markets and are facing sanctions for it. So, like, what purpose does Tim Cook serve?
Maybe to come up with devious legal strategies.
Yeah, exactly. But when those fail, what are you left with?
I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about, David. You don't like your Vision Pro?
My goggles.
Yeah, I love
that are sweeping the nation.
I love putting that on my head and then walking around out in public. People think it's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we can turn now to talk a little bit about the oncoming supply chain disruptions. You had a good piece in the Prospect, of course. We'll link to it in the show notes. But yeah, I guess maybe you could start give us little general overview of what we are sort of looking down the barrel at in terms of, blank sailings? Like, what are those, and how are
Right.
shipping, forecasts coming in for the next few weeks in various ports?
All right, here we go with the shipping report.
Honk honk.
I was not heartened by the pandemic analogy to February 2020.
Yeah.
That was
So
unnerving.
on April 2nd, we had Liberation Day. You all remember it. You love it. We're going to celebrate it for millennia from now. And Trump at that point announced these very large tariffs, which got larger on China, and then they were paused on the other countries that were basically all other countries, including ones that only have penguins that inhabit the country. But what that had the effect of, as far as the U.S. and China, is basically an embargo. The tariffs are something like 145%, in some cases 245%. Those are at a level where you're just not going to be able to do a viable business and still maintain a profit margin. So a lot of those relationships have been at least paused, some severed. And, what we can generally say is there are not a lot of goods coming from China to the United States or vice versa at this point. Because of export controls, because of real embargoes, denials of goods and services, and because of just the tariffs. So let's talk about like timelines here. So April 2nd, that happens. It takes roughly 30 days for a ship that leaves a port in China to reach the West Coast ports in the United States. It takes a couple weeks more for that to get around to, the western or southwestern ports, the southeastern ports like Savannah and Houston, or the eastern ports like New York City. So there's a lag time here. You don't, the next day after something gets canceled, you're not going to feel it. So 30 days puts you right around now. And sure enough, if you look at the ports of LA and Los Angeles, which is the largest in the nation because they take a lot of goods in from Asia, year over year, bookings are down. They're going to be down next week. The forecast is 35%. It was a huge number. And what that means in the near term, like next week, there are just going to be fewer things to take off ships, to put into trucks, and to move into warehouses or into retailers all over the country. So the first people that really experience this are trucking companies, warehouse companies, shippers, longshoremen, those types of people. When does it actually get to store shelves and you going into a grocery store or hardware store and there just isn't anything available? That's going to take a little more time. First of all, it takes time to get goods from the ship into circulation. And, under the normal process, that's going to take another week or two. And so that gets you to mid-May. But the other factor here is that a lot of companies were front-running the tariffs. And what I mean by that is they were bulking up on inventory prior to the tariff announcement. And so a lot of companies, we saw this in the GDP results, actually, because the reason that GDP contracted in the first quarter is mainly because of imports, that there was a surge of imports, basically people pulling forward these purchases. I'm talking about importers pulling forward these purchases and then stuffing them in warehouses somewhere to compensate for what might be lower production of goods going forward. So then what happens is, okay, so now we're in May, and in a couple weeks, there's just less goods coming into the country. But retailers can say, oh, well, we have all that inventory that we got initially. Let's just pull that down from the shelves and keep stocking our goods from our warehouse inventory. that's not going to last forever. There are only so many warehouses. There's only so many physical stuff that can be held in the United States in the places that we hold them, which are warehouses. And that can't last forever. So let's conservatively say it's a month or 2 months. It might be less than that. We don't have a lot of certainty here. But I would say by midsummer, that ends. And, that sounds like, oh, well, we have a little bit of cushion. Trump could stop the tariffs. He could say tomorrow, he could go on television and say, look, I don't know. I was an idiot. We're not doing the tariffs. Everybody stop. That is not going to solve the problem. Once you're down the road, we're a month into a severely shortened amount of goods coming into the country, or coming on boats, at least headed for this country. It's not like every importer in America can call up their supplier in China and say, okay, we need the goods now, and expect them to snap to it. A lot of those manufacturers, the suppliers, have already made other options. They're selling, they got orders from Europe, they got orders from other countries, and the American importers are going to have to get in line. Or those Chinese suppliers went out of business because they just didn't have any business, the normal business that they were getting from the United States. So there just aren't suppliers available. So there's going to be this mad rush of, whenever, if ever, the tariffs get turned off. It's going to take time. It's going to take months probably to ramp back up to a normal level of trade and production. And so in that time, there's no substitute effect. It's not like we're building a bunch of factories right now and we're creating the goods that are previously only coming out of China. So some of this is baked in. We're going to have the problem, and we have a general sense of when it's going to happen. So it kind of feels like a pre-pandemic moment when we're like, yeah, there's this thing going on over in China and it's killing people. And, maybe it's not here now, but it's probably coming. And you felt like you had this kind of super knowledge. Like I know this is coming, and I don't see a lot of people concerned about it. But, I'm not an oracle. I'm just reading the paper, right? I don't have this super amount of information. I just know what's coming down the pike. And so it's a very strange kind of feeling to have this foreknowledge and to see that we don't have a lot we can do about it.
Just call us Cassandra. Am I right? Yeah, no, I remember in February 2020, the bizarre response that so many people had, and say, oh, it'll pass. It's just a small problem. Nope. I remember teaching and the, head of the university was like, I think it's just not going to be a big deal. We're not going to have to shut down at all. And it was just didn't take a genius to see how wrong that was. David, it sounds like there's a certain amount of harm baked in terms of maybe unemployment, in terms of maybe prices being affected for consumers. Is there, so that's like the minimum amount of harm that's baked in. What is the spectrum of outcomes on the other side of that if Trump doesn't respond to all the pain and suffering he's causing?
Yeah, let's like manifest what does this mean in the real world? So, if there are less things coming from the ports, the people that service the ports are going to lose their jobs. Truckers are going to lose their jobs. If warehouses are more depleted, warehouse workers are going to lose their jobs. If retailers don't have as much stuff on the store shelves, they're going to want to jack up prices to maintain some semblance of inventory. And, if they're going to increase prices, maybe they need to take that out somewhere else in the chain because they're going to lose volume of sales. And so that could reflect in retailers cutting jobs. And so now you're talking about a lot of industries in the country that employ a lot of people. And you're talking about a lot of job cuts. I don't have an exact number, but I know that UPS this week said 20,000 jobs are going to be cut. And that seems like a direct result of these tariffs and lower volume. And that's one company, right? It's a big company, but it's one company. And there are a lot of retailers out there. So are we talking about millions of jobs? Potentially. And if you have this lower level of economic activity, I mean, you're talking about goods from China being down 60% by some estimates. And if you look at that overall, that's something like $1 trillion, or maybe even more than that, $1.2 trillion of economic activity that is being lost on an annual basis. And so that's a GDP contraction, and that's a recession. And those things tend to fold on themselves. So we have like the SOM rule, Claudia Sahm, who's a former Federal Reserve economist, that says, once unemployment goes up, I think by 0.5 percentage point, then it tends to keep going up because these things build on themselves. People are unemployed. They start spending less. That leads to more unemployment. People start spending less, and so on and so on. So you can get into a spiral here. And the weird thing about this is it's a very back to the 70s moment. And I like 70s fashion, but I don't know that I'm going to like this part of it, because usually when you have unemployment, you don't have inflation skyrocket at the same time. But the peculiar circumstances of this, where you're going to have fewer things on store shelves and supply and demand dictates that that's going to lead to rising prices, is you're going to have simultaneous inflation and unemployment. And in the 1970s under Carter, where there was a similar situation, that was known as stagflation. And so that's the fear, is that we're moving towards a stagflation environment. And we don't have a lot of time to sort of pull ourselves out of that spiral. Decisions need to be made really fast about, how we're going to move forward with these tariffs, and whether or not this is just going to be a blip or a deepening set of recessionary and inflationary pressures that lead to more and more stagflation.
Can we talk briefly about the de minimis loophole? As when I was prepping for this episode, I saw the various outlets had reported that is now closed. But I saw you were quoting Lori Wallach, right? Who was saying that it's not the de minimis loophole, by the way. So this is the law that says that anything, any individual package that's worth less than $800 gets to come through duty free. Which, that comes from the old days of saying, like, when you went on a vacation, you could bring home some presents and stuff without paying a tariff on it.
Right.
So what's the situation with that?
It's very unclear to me, and I haven't touched base with Lori, and I probably should, because today was this deadline where essentially, I mean, de minimis is a real problem. So this loophole has really been exploited, particularly by Chinese direct-to-consumer companies. So I'm talking about Shein and Temu, these companies that are based in China, that manufacture in China, that then ship those finished goods directly to your door. So you get a shirt or a bike component or whatever it is directly from China, and therefore it bypasses all of the tariff stuff that is going on. And most of it is done that way. Some of it is done differently. When you're talking about Shein and Temu, they have actually some warehouses in the United States. But the problem here is that we've had de minimis packages coming, particularly from China. The vast majority of them have gone from like in the millions a year to over 1 billion packages a year. And a large part of the U.S.-China trade deficit isn't counted because it's part of this de minimis thing. So as long as you declare, and by the way, the only way to declare a de minimis package is you're just kind of saying, yeah, this is an $800. I don't know what's in there because we're not inspecting it. We're not putting a tariff on it. We're not doing anything with it. So it's sort of a take it on faith kind of situation. And it's devastated textile companies in the United States, devastated retailers. So there was a reason to do this. And so the Trump administration, they started to try this in February. It turned out to be a disaster, and they stopped it within 3 days because, now you're talking about 1 billion new packages that have to be inspected or go through customs or go through some sort of process. It's a nightmare. So now they're trying it again. It started today, and they're putting it through something called direct entry, I believe is the process. I think that's what it's called. What Lori Wallach, who is probably as knowledgeable about this stuff as anybody in the country, she works for an organization called the Rethink Trade, which is part of the American Economic Liberties Project. And she'll be able to say this better than I. So you should get her on as a guest, probably to talk about this better. But my understanding is that DHL and some of the other express shippers had a problem with getting rid of this de minimis loophole because they make a lot of money off of, facilitating these shipments from China to the United States. And so they got some sort of carve out. I believe it's for goods between $250 and $800. So somewhat larger goods. They got a carve out where they don't have to go through a certain process, and therefore they can bypass it and be more attractive to companies who want to continue this practice in China of direct shipping to consumers. So, and DHL, when they wrote a press release about this, talked about their constructive engagement with the Trump administration on this issue. So that's about the extent of what I can say, with confidence about this. It seems like the rule is effectively dead, but some of the enforcement is in such a way that these companies might still get away with duty-free shipping.
Well, handy. As long as I can get, a prom dress, for my niece or something for like $8, then, Trump can destroy the country for all I care. Maybe we could chat a little bit about the kind of international diplomatic context, because I guess it's easy to forget that this is a sort of two-sided thing, that China has a voice in this. And so far they've been basically standing up to Trump, not really giving an inch, and selecting their counter proposals and reactions and counter tariffs with, designed to hurt the most Trumpy constituencies. I recently read they turned away a shipment of 12,000 metric tons of pork. Not sure where that's going to go. But, the Chinese people eat a lot of pork. They get it. They get a lot of it from the United States, from farmers, from heavily Trumpy places in Trumpy states like, Iowa and Nebraska and so forth. And, I think if you're China and you're sort of in this contest of like who can endure the most pain, and looking at the fact that like Trump is plainly just bleeding support. Nobody really wanted this to happen. A lot of people didn't think it was going to happen. And meanwhile, China, has they care about public opinion too, but it is a sort of totalitarian dictatorship. And they can point to the fact that they didn't start this fight. It's not their fault. It's not Xi Jinping's fault. And he's standing up for China and protecting its interests against these American aggressors. And so, what do you reckon the sort of odds are that China won't even accept a climb down, and will just be like, no, we're going to decouple and the hell with you?
Yeah, I think at the outset, what China has said is you got to take off all these tariffs before we can even start negotiating. And that's been their red line. And, on various occasions, Trump and the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent have said, oh, yeah, we're talking to China. We're negotiating with China. And China comes out and says, no, we're not talking to you. And these are our red lines. And so it shows what a more powerful position, what better leverage China has in this discussion right now. There's kind of, if you look at sort of the basic character of this, you can you can sort of buy off problems with money, but you can't just magically create stuff. So China is giving the stuff and America is giving the money. And if America stops giving the money, then China can print renminbi and give the money to the manufacturers that are losing work and jobs. But there is no way that America can just sort of print stuff and give it to to fill the shortages in areas where they need it. We saw this in the pandemic when there was a shortage of PPE and we had our medical professionals in trash bags to treat COVID. So we know this is a problem. We saw this be a problem like 5 years ago, not very long ago in the imagination, and we didn't really do a whole lot to build supply, not just in critical goods. I mean, we did some critical goods manufacturing reshoring, but the basic stuff that is still sort of, mostly derived from China, we have not progressed to a degree. Some of that because it takes time, and some of that because we've just sort of left those industries to companies abroad. And we can't just whip up the stuff and print it right away. And Trump knows this, right? I mean, we have seen him climb down on technology products. We've seen him climb down this week on auto parts. So he belatedly realized that, yes, we make cars in the United States, but if you put tariffs on everything, then you're also putting tariffs on the components of cars, many of which we get from places like China and which now have bigger tariffs. So now he's kind of rolled that back and said, okay, we'll put a tariff on the foreign autos coming into the U.S., but the component parts, they can come in and we won't double up the tariffs there. So, there's only one side of this that's scrambling, that's like changing on the fly. China's sitting there and saying, all right, whatever, do what you want to do. We can get our soybeans from Brazil. We can get other goods that are, that we're having a problem with from other countries. And we can pay off our manufacturers and put them to work doing stuff that's for domestic consumption, like rail cars and BYD motors and all of the other things that they make. So I think that China clearly has the leverage. America is not the indispensable nation. And this is creating a situation that could lead to a Chinese century.
It's a good reminder that tariffs are not a substitute for actual industrial policy. And I don't know if Trump understands the difference, but we certainly do need an industrial policy. And I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act was...
we had one.
Right? Yeah.
We had one.
Remind the audience how that's been harmed by the Trump administration. What are some of the ways that's been impeded and some of the ways that maybe it hasn't?
Absolutely. And Ryan's written about this as well. But yeah, we had a really revitalized manufacturing sector in a very targeted way. So the Inflation Reduction Act, clean energy, the Chips and Science Act for semiconductors, critical industries, and also infant industries that we thought were good export opportunities, things like electric vehicles, where there was a combination of targeted tariffs in some cases to ensure that those infant industries weren't just strangled by the dumping of goods from abroad, and also subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act, workforce training, and a whole host of other incentives to make sure that those infant industries could be stood up. And it was working. We have the graphs to prove it. We know that manufacturing construction was wildly successful in 2023 and 2024. We know that now we're on track for something like 30% of all high-end chips being made in the United States. I mean, semiconductor chips. And all that was bumping along. but much of it has been hobbled, particularly the clean energy stuff, a little bit less on the semiconductors. Much of that has been hobbled by Trump administration policies. They've restricted some of the grants, some of the other products, and the uncertainty of tariffs and the tariff components that some of these companies need from abroad to continue their manufacturing. If you look at that manufacturing construction chart, which went up sort of in a straight line, it then has leveled off and started to go down. And there was a report that came out this week from an organization called Climate Power, and it shows thousands of jobs lost in clean energy. And it's a real tragedy because we figured out how to do this, and we were doing it well, and we were delivering on it, and we were learning as we went. Because the thing about manufacturing is that once you get a cluster going of a particular industry in a particular region, the knowledge kind of feeds off one another. And that's how you build an industrial base. And sometimes offshoots of that happen, and people have ideas and new industries emerge. And that's how it works. And that kind of beneficial, kind of virtuous circle was starting to form. And now we're seeing it all kind of fade away.
Yeah, one thing I actually wrote about today is the Loan Programs Office, which was one of the, parts of the Inflation Reduction Act. It was heavily funded, just got a ton of money. And basically it's just a bank, and they give out loans to projects that are basically out beyond the technological frontier. Commercial banks won't lend to these companies because that's not a proven thing. A bank wants something that's already been proved to work. And so they had funded, all kinds of stuff under the Biden administration.
And going back to the Obama administration.
Yeah. They had it was a much smaller version that was part of the Recovery Act stimulus package. And the Doge guys they've like basically forced out more than half the staff, like 60% of the staff, probably more than that, all the existing, that basically no more money going out, and some of the existing loans are under question. There was a $15 billion grant to the California utility PG&E that was for basically modernizing and upgrading their whole, suite of investments that they have, getting some more renewables in there, upgrading the grid and making it more resistant to fires, because some PG&E equipment has touched off wildfires in the past, and they're not sure if they're going to get that money. That $15 billion is a lot. And
that's great to hear. That's, as someone sitting in Southern California right now, about 5 miles from the Palisades fire and where that was, that's great to hear. And the irony here is that probably the biggest success story of the Loan Programs Office during the Obama administration was a loan given that really saved the fortunes of a little car company called Tesla.
Yep. Yeah, they got
no good deed goes unpunished.
$546 million. It was right in the book Edward Niedermeyer wrote called Ludicrous, The Unvarnished Story of Tesla Motors. He tells this story. They were like on the verge of bankruptcy. They were trying to get their Model S, like their first real production car, out. And it was a total cluster. Elon Musk is very bad at manufacturing technology. He has all these idiotic ideas, like you're going to make the assembly line run faster than humans can see. That's just not how you do advanced manufacturing at all. Gave them this loan that basically saved their bacon and let them get the car out and recoup their investment in their original factory. And now Elon and his Doge goons are going through and pulling the ladder up behind him.
Right.
And
and I mean, federal credit more broadly, it's not just the Loan Programs Office, but, there was this thing called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was creating essentially green banks, development banks. And this is the one where the EPA tried to claw back the money from using Citibank, like demanding the money back after the fact. And there's been a big legal fight over that and a lot of uncertainty there. If we're going to transition to a green economy, you need the financing support in place to do that. And Ryan just explained the dilemma, which is that unproven technologies aren't going to get that kind of support. So if you create a development bank that would actually, carry forward this kind of financing, then that's a big part of the ballgame here. And when you take that away, you take the tax credits away, or you threaten them at least, and you take the grants away, there's not a lot of opportunities. You can't just tell companies, oh, we have high tariffs on goods, so now you can make goods here. That's not the only thing that we need. There's a lot else that goes into it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the most indicative story of how ill thought out this is one of those companies that had been approved, got an initial approval for a loan programs office loan. I think it's like Aspirin Microgel or something, a battery company. They were going to build a factory in Georgia, and they canceled their loan. They're taking the factory plans. Where are they going? China. They're going to build it in China instead. They figured that really, really fucking great. America first, baby. Just it's very depressing. But yeah, at any rate, maybe one last aspect of this worth dwelling on a little bit, is that outside of China, one of the key strategies of the Biden administration was sort of trying to isolate China, as part of the, reshoring strategy. We wanted to build alliances. We wanted to build alliances with, especially in North America, but also with, friendly nations like Japan, like South Korea, Europe, of course, and others. And Trump is just pissing off all of those countries at the same time. The Japanese in particular, Paul Krugman had a great post about this. He went, the Japanese rather, they went and tried to meet with the Trump delegation, to get there, because they still have the 10% tariff, if I'm not mistaken, which is a big tariff. That's thinking about exporting like a car from Japan or something like that. 10% of a Honda, Civic or something is many thousands of dollars. And the Japanese delegation, they couldn't even get a list of demands. The Trump people didn't know what they wanted. And so they just got up and left. And then the Japanese officials, they're talking about weaponizing their holdings of U.S. Treasury debt, potentially selling it. And I think they own more than any other country except China. Just been buying this stuff hand over fist for decades without a peep of protest. And now they're so pissed off that not only are they thinking about doing that, they're also in talks with China, about basically a coordinated response to Trump's tariffs. And there's a few.
Which, if you know anything historically about those relationships, and it's not just the China-Japan one, but the one that's really crazy is the China-Vietnam one.
Yeah.
Where Xi went over there and praised the Vietnamese. This is like 3,000 years of history that is going down a well because the U.S. is being so ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, during the Biden administration, there was this phrase known as friendshoring, right, that came up that said, well, look, I mean, maybe there are national security reasons, there are economic reasons that you do want to reduce or at least diversify the relationship globally on trade and not be so centered in China. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, but in order to do that, you need to start trading with other countries, friendlier countries, and while you're also building your manufacturing base and critical industries in the United States. And yeah, if you're fighting, there's the idea of fighting a two-front war is probably the limits of what the U.S. military can do. We're fighting like a 200-front war right now, right? That's what this trade war is, and it's insane to do that, and it's proceeding almost exactly as you would expect.
Yeah.
What's your sense, David, of? I mean, the fact that Trump isn't so crazy that he won't at least do carve-outs with the automakers and with various things. So he does seem sometimes to respond to the insane consequences of his stupid decisions. But what's your sense for like gaming this out when all the bad things inevitably happen? What pressure points, or is it nothing harder to predict than what Trump might do, but what pressure points do you think might actually have more of a consequence in terms of changing things?
It's hard to know. I mean, clearly, in the beginning of April, when he saw the
market reaction
situation going on with the treasuries, with U.S. treasuries, where they started going up while the stock market was going down, which was weird, like something that doesn't happen. It suggested flight from the United States, either by foreign countries or other institutional investors. I think that sort of, concentrated the minds in the White House a little bit. But it's all based on, this is all based on kind of whim, right? I mean, it's whoever talks to Trump last who generally gets the success of what is going on. He kind of goes by whoever talks to him last in a room, and that's the policy that gets made. So, there was that crazy story where Besant and Lutnick had to come up with a time when Peter Navarro was in another meeting, and then they rushed in and said, Trump, you got to do this. And that was the only way they could get it done. It's like the fate of the free world is hanging on whether, Peter Navarro has a full calendar. Like that's what we're hoping for.
The books that are going to be written, David, the books that are going to be written.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's the problem is it's hard to say what can influence Trump because it's so contingent on who's in his orbit at any one time.
Are any of his idiot staffers getting what they want? Does this look like something that's good for some of his people? They like what's happening now? I'm so confused by
Well, I mentioned Navarro, and he's like this trade hardliner who's written books about China and definitely wants to see the full decoupling happening here. I think there are forces, and maybe Ryan, you know better about this. There are kind of forces that think that moving back to sort of a 19th century manufacturing economy as a way to preserve the natural order of the family and get males working again and put women back in the home where they belong. I mean, there's a whole kind of weirdness around that is kind of unspoken, but it's I think kind of at the forefront of this move. And then, Trump has said for kind of 40 years, 50 years that he's a tariff guy and that he sees trade as a zero-sum game, that, either we're winning or losing based on our trade deficit. So there's a lot of ways to spin this as a win, I guess, for the United States, but it involves not looking at the physical reality and the consequences of these actions.
Ben Smith had this article in Semaphore the other day that was all about the group chats of Mark Andreessen and the various other sort of elites in Silicon Valley and DC. And yeah, I think to your point, David, that there is this kind of invented tradition of the glory days of back when men were men and the women knew it, and everyone had a manufacturing job in like a foundry or something, and they were swinging a big hammer all day with no shirt, and their wife was at home with the kids, cooking. These
are like Stephen Miller fantasies.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess on the one hand, there's this ridiculous over romanticization of the manufacturing sector, which is important. I think, like what Biden was doing was the right idea. It is important to have some of that capacity in the country, but those jobs are often not that great. And especially
they're better now than they were. I mean, although there is mining and stuff like that is, they're talking about needing to bring back. Some of those mining critical minerals are important for, the clean energy revolution.
Yeah.
And so they are talking about that. But, if you're talking about an actual factory these days, it is more automated. It is cleaner. It is more of an engineering job as much as it is a manufacturing job. The way Lutnick talks about it is like, we're all going to be fixing the robots. And that's not true. But it's not quite as arduous as it was. But it's also, there's no guarantee that a green job or an industrial job is a good job. We have this kind of weird association, mainly because of legacy circumstances, because the UAW and the United Steelworkers were able to unionize those factories, that those are good jobs, but they don't need to be good jobs. And consequently, it's not the case that retail jobs have to be bad non-union jobs. I mean, all of this is contingent on whether you can organize your workplace. And if you can't organize a factory, it's not going to be like an old 30s, factory where you're able to buy the Model T Ford off the line, right? And if Starbucks ever finally unionizes, maybe those jobs are the jobs that look like the factory jobs of the 30s. It all depends on the level of worker power that is put forward.
Eric Blanc talked to us about the challenges of service companies like Starbucks companies having a dozen employees a pop all around the country, where it's harder to organize people who don't know each other. They're spread all over, but some of the advances with Zoom and so forth can combat that. But there was something nice about having like a bunch of people in one place who know each other in terms of
right. I mean, because of the way that we do labor organizing in this country on a shop by shop basis, it's harder for a retail store to really organize itself relative to, I got a big target at a factory and I got thousands of people working at the factory. A union organizer thinks, okay, if I put my energy there rather than in 30 Starbucks shops, it's more worth it. But, there are ways around that, sectoral bargaining and master agreements, which is what Starbucks is, the Starbucks Workers United is trying to do with Starbucks. So there's a master template agreement that, if it's signed on to, then any shop that is bargaining just automatically, opts into that agreement. So, yeah, there are ways to do it, I think. I think there's just this legacy thinking around manufacturing jobs being good jobs because they're union jobs, and non-manufacturing jobs being bad jobs because they're non-union jobs, which, I think is a bit distorted.
Yeah. Especially when you have the right-wing manly machismo thing is
right.
Yeah. You just a total refusal to, among this crowd to reckon with the fact that, in the heyday of U.S. manufacturing, when it was the case that even the one of those jobs could support a whole family, that was the height of the New Deal and the labor movement. And what they're actually sort of like looking to create, though it probably won't work, is a 19th century labor model where it was horribly dangerous and people were being crushed to death in rail yards, and the work, it was like child labor, and conditions were awful and pay was awful and there were no benefits. And,
people think that Republicans are pining for the 1950s, but they really are pining for the 1890s. And, just read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair to figure out how that goes.
Yeah. But that's probably a good place to tie it up. Thanks, David, for coming on. And thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you in the next episode.